Welcome to ESB Outspoken with Angela and Richard Shelf. Today we continue our virtual training and we've got a special guest. Richard, go ahead and introduce him.
Yeah, our special guest is Brian Fanzo. Brian is a digital futurist, an outstanding speaker, and even more important than that, he translates the trends of tomorrow to inspire the changes of today. And I'm going to tell you what, Brian is on here because of how he's inspired the changes. He is now an expert amongst the speakers in the speaking industry in home professional studios.
Yes.
And so, Brian, could you tell us just a little bit about your home studio and why you got started?
Sure. No, yeah, thanks for having me. And I appreciate that intro. For me, I've worked from home. So I graduated college in 2003. So of the 17 years since graduating, about 14 of them I've worked from home. When I worked for the US government, when I worked for my data center, and for the last about 6 years working for myself. And I've always had kind of let's just say a content creation space to work from home. But for me, this was really important to dedicate really in my own environment. And in March, I was actually living in a different house. And unfortunately, due to COVID, the landlord, the person that owned the house I was renting, decided they had to sell the house because they had lost their jobs. And I don't think anyone, we were all pivoting. And the last thing I wanted to do was pivot and move and create a new studio. That was a curveball I wasn't expecting. But I got, it kind of allowed me to restart from scratch a little bit at the new place. So about 2 weeks ago, I moved into a new place now, and I have a little mother-in-law suite off to the side of the Rambler house that I have here. And so yeah, I turned it into multiple cameras, multiple microphones. And I think the luxury that I had was, for the last many years, probably 3 or 4 years, I've done a lot of virtual presenting and even converting a lot of my keynotes into a more virtual style presentation. And so I have the content and I knew what I needed as far as the tech, rather than trying to let the tech dictate what my presentation would be. And so for me, when I got into the new studio, I was like, okay, I need a wide shot that allows me to stand up and kind of do my thing. But then I also need somewhere that I can sit and kind of give that more intimate conversation. And so that's what I've created here in my house in Northern Virginia.
That's absolutely fantastic. Well, do you think that it was absolutely crucial for you and your speaking to do what you've done with the studio?
So I think we all have, it was interesting. If you think about it, in March, and I've done over 3,500 live streams since 2014. So live video, online, this was really where I thrived. But let's face it, the idea of a webinar has always been kind of stereotyped. We even had like a webinar price and a webinar standard presentation that I've been booking. And so in March, as this pivot was happening, one of I was very lucky, Michelle and I were sitting down, I said, one of my goals is fee integrity. I want to not lose the momentum I've built on stages, and I want to kind of work with that fee integrity. And when I started to look at that, I started to ask questions with bureaus and events, even to my past clients, and said, what was most important to you? And a lot of them came back with high quality, simple user experience, something that stood out. And then really the other piece of it was making sure that when you were delivering something, it was above and beyond what you would get from a standard webinar, right? And so I think one of the biggest reasons for all of the tech and kind of investing all of this time was really just to explain, like, this is not a webinar. This is an experience that is built virtually. And it's understandable. We've spent how many years kind of, I'd say, I wouldn't say mailing in the webinar, but kind of giving the webinar its own stereotype. And if I wanted to keep that fee integrity where I was on stages, I knew I would have to level up my game in my home studio.
Man, I love the thought, because the whole experience idea, that does set you apart. And there is a stereotype, and everybody thinks that they've got the Brady Bunch looking Zoom webinar and that's all they can do. So this really makes it a big difference. Do you think, I know it's been important to you, and obviously as you sat down and planned, it was important to you to go in this direction, to have a studio, to make it an experience. Do you think it's important for all speakers?
So I think all speakers, this is the interesting piece for me because I work with influencers and creators, and it's like that interesting, development where if you take an amazing YouTuber that creates amazing video and you put them on stage, most of the time they're not great on stage, right? And I think for a lot of speakers, you take a speaker off a stage and you stick them in front of a video camera and they try to just repurpose what they did offline. It's just a standard YouTube video, or at best, a bad TED Talk. And I think with that in mind, I think it is important to set yourself up. Now, I have 5 cameras here in my home office for allowing me, and I don't use all 5 of them for all of my presentations, but I do have one presentation that is very, it's a longer workshop style. So I change different angles for different reasons. But I've actually had over, my number was 51 when I stopped counting, but I had 51 one-on-one calls with speakers that were friends of mine over the years of just, hey, let me help you decide what technology is important. And I think for me, one of the big things is making sure you're able to convey that emotional connection that you really do well on stage, right? So if you're someone that needs to stand up, make sure you have a setup that allows you to stand up. If you're someone that's more comfortable in a chair, but you're not sure the background, whatever that is you're trying to convey. And I know as speakers, we now have more variables that we have to handle than we've ever had before, right? We're going to take a lot of, we're going to remember how lucky we are when we go back to offline conferences and we show up and we have someone that lavaliers us up. They give us a control. We do our test and then we go, right? We're very lucky to be just the talent, where now we have to be the camera, the audio, the technology, the environment. But I actually look at it the other way and say, we have all of these different ways to tell our story, rather than looking at it and saying, oh my goodness, I had to take what I do offline and put it online. I said, let's look at what I do great offline and reinvent it online. And I think every speaker, if they're willing to approach it that way, can really find value kind of investing in that setup.
I know that a lot of audiences a lot of people learn in different ways. So how do you try to keep everybody engaged and, really honed in listening when they learn in different ways, and especially online when the attention spans are so much less?
So this would be my probably number one tip, and my number one thing that I think every event, every speaker has to take it upon themselves, is that we must educate the audience on what their expectation is for the virtual event. Because let's face it, we're attendees. I sign up for 10 webinars a week and I plan on attending one maybe, right? I'm like, oh, I'll just sign up and get the download later. Or when I sign up, it's on tab 147 on my browser and I'm barely listening. But I don't care how great you're set up, how great of a speaker you are. If someone's not anticipating or scheduling the time to be committed to your content, nothing you're going to do is going to be successful. So for every event that I've worked with, I will tell them, like, let's create a video that I explain to them what I expect for them. And let me tell them that, like, this experience is only as great as you, the audience, are willing to participate, right? And I think that's an extremely important element. And I would say the second piece of that is, we hear this a lot, and we'll hear, events, teams will say, I want an extremely engaged, interactive virtual presentation. And for me, it's kind of buzzwordy just to begin with. But the thing I've been firing back with was, do you want an interactive presentation, or do you want a presentation that maintains and holds your audience's attention? And when I put it that way, it's two different presentation styles. If someone wants me to create a talk that is interactive, where I have the chat, the Q&A, I have poll questions, we switch in, I can build the talk that way. I set everything up that way. But if the goal is to maintain attention, I can set it up completely different. And I would argue a lot of times we assume that there's only that one way to maintain attention, right? It must ask questions, it must have poll questions. But I like to change, the camera angle, I change every 6 to 8 minutes in the presentation that is about maintaining attention. I use a combination of live video and pre-recorded video. I have some transitions that will allow me to transition, in between. And so I think that's important. I think it's that education of the audience expectation, but also kind of redefining what our expectation is as a speaker, because if we're not designing it for one or the other, we kind of get down that middle road, and we've seen it, right? We go, we want everyone to interact in the chat, so please, interact. And then the rest of the presentation, we're just blasting our message. And at the end, we're like, sorry, there's 5 minutes for questions. I'll ask one question, right? And that's like, no wonder the audience is like, you didn't want me to interact. What is that? So I think for us as speakers, if interaction is what we're being hired to deliver, we need to build that into our presentation. Like I even have one of my favorite talks that I'm giving right now is 5 minutes into the presentation, I throw up 3 different pictures on the screen and I let the audience vote on what the closing story will be. So they get to choose based on the pictures what they get to hear at the end. It's kind of like choose your own adventure style. And that kind of kicks it off. They immediately know that they're going to help shape my content, which out of the gate, I think holds their attention more than, the average presentation.
Brian, what I love in what you said, there's a lot of things I loved in what you said, because I'm learning as we go here, which is wonderful. But one of the things that I really loved is you really put some of the ownership of the entertainment value back on the attendees.
Yes.
If you don't have the attendees feeling any ownership, then they're not engaged, and they're not engaged, you're going to float around and they're not going to be a part of it. So making them responsible for it almost guarantees their engagement. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that piece of what you just told us. It's fantastic. Well, now, is there, when you put together this studio and you have all this wonderful stuff and this equipment for these people, what is it that you feel like is absolutely paramount for a speaker getting started to put the studio together? What is it in that must they have, and what are some things that they don't necessarily have to have when they're first getting started? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, and this is probably the most popular question I've received over the last couple of months. And I have, I built out a little package on Amazon. I can send you the link, but it's under $500. And I call it, it's the Zoom upgrade from looking up your nose and the light coming out your back and it's the 3 pieces that I think are most important. I think, first and foremost, a microphone that's not connected to your laptop or your device, allowing you to kind of separate. So you guys have the ones there that are hanging. I have one that's a tabletop one that's sitting here directly in front of me now. So I think a tabletop microphone is the first piece. The second one is a web camera or DSLR, any camera that isn't the web camera in your laptop or your computer, to allow you to level it at eye level, right? So we're looking directly in to the machine. And then the third one is a ring light. Like, I'm a big fan of a ring light, just the circular light that you can sit behind there. You can get the 3 that I'm actually using, that I use on a regular basis, for under $500. And the difference between using your laptop microphone or even the headphones, right? I think as speakers, this is something too that I think is extremely important. The more we can get to getting how we do on stage, the more comfortable we'll be without the audience. Because without the audience is already the most difficult element. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. I know Tony Robbins recently had like 7 TVs and like 140 people on video to kind of give him that nonverbal feedback. But like, I reached out to his social media manager. I was like, how did he do that? And he's like, it was like a week's worth of work with the Zoom team and all of this tech. And I was like, well, he's the only one so far that has figured out how to get an audience. But I do think it's important to kind of have those things like, when we're on stage, we're not, we don't have headphones attached to our computer. So as soon as we put headphones attached to our computer, no wonder we're uncomfortable. No wonder we feel outside of our comfort zone. So those are the 3 things that I think are most important. I'm a big believer in, the only guarantee you can have with live video is that something will go wrong. That's just the truth. So
we've experienced that.
So I think when I look at a lot of the tech, I want to minimize the amount of variables that I have to troubleshoot. So what I mean by that is, like, the microphone I'm using right now plugs in USB directly to my computer. Now, there's lots of microphones that plug into a sounding board. I have one of those over here for my podcast. But if you think about it from a troubleshooting perspective, well, now I have to worry about the soundboard, the power of the soundboard. So I'm a big believer in not overdoing a lot of these variables, especially, I'm not a sound expert by any stretch of the imagination. So why not let the microphone and the technology on the computer do the work rather than feeling, that piece? And I can tell you, so many of the speaker one-on-ones that I've had, these are speakers that are making great money, and they have this weird association to, if I spend a lot of money, it's going to be a lot better of a variable in the virtual space. And I'm all for high quality, but there's a balance between high quality that you can always make work and high quality that has so many issues that become so much frustrating that you can't really decide all of the different parts. So I would say the thing to avoid is try not to add unnecessary elements to your home studio that you're not extremely familiar with.
Yeah,
And I love that point, because I think if you're not used to using the equipment and then you're having to use the equipment and speak and do it, like you said, do it all, that it makes it uncomfortable. And I do think the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I think that the more speakers will get into this and the more they practice, and even if it's in front of their families, so they have some type of feedback, it'll be better.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, now, obviously you know a lot of people who have been challenged at making this transition. You know, you said 51 people that have already called you about how to work through all this. Are there any other speakers that you feel like that have done this well, like you have?
There are a couple, and there's a couple that I can say that we've, based on us seeing each other doing things, we've had multiple Zoom calls together with a couple different people. One of them is Brent Menswar.
Yep.
Brent Menswar is the soon-to-be author of Black Sheep, and he's a musician as well as a speaker on culture and values. And he's done a great job. He plays the guitar. He has a camera that actually pans along with him as he's singing, as if he's, it would be on stage. He uses some really neat overlay graphics over his shoulder instead of slides. So it's really kind of, it's not flashy and not a whole bunch of different camera angles, but very high quality. Also, the audio quality is important for Brent. I think he's doing a great job. Another one is Vin Yang. Vin Yang's a musician. Vin has taken over his entire garage and turned it into a magician studio. He has like a digital whiteboard, 5 different camera angles, but he's able to do like close-ups on his hands when he's doing magic tricks. And then he's able to pan back out, and he's set it up to where he manages it all himself. So he has a couple different boards and interactive pieces there, which I think is really great. Another person that jumps to mind is Clint Pulver. Clint Pulver, millennial, talks about a lot of the culture. He's a drummer, and he actually just took a corner of his house, put up black curtains along the walls, has his drum set with an overhead camera angle, has a couple different cameras, and is able to play the drums, high quality sound, but also stand up and walk and talk to the camera, which I think is really exciting and a great way of kind of pushing that envelope. So those are 4 actually, and I'll give you another one. LGO, Laura Gosling-Osler, she's creating some she has a new book. It's actually over here on my shelf. It's called Limitless, and she's done a great job of really, she has a strong bookcase and a really great background with a high quality camera. And she's doing weekly Facebook Lives just to get used to the presenting. And so I think she's done an amazing job on that side. And I think that's, to your point, Angela, I think getting used to it. Scott McCain, one of my heroes in the speaking space, when he asked me, early on in March, he's like, what do I do to get comfortable? I was like, go live every day. Well, he's gone live every day since March 10th. And I give him credit because I don't think I could have, right? There's plenty of days where I just didn't have the motivation, but he's been doing what he calls the daily distinction. And he does a live show where he's, talking to the camera. And now he has transitions. He has an intro video. Now he's, bringing in multiple guests. He even had a guest in studio. And so I think that's part of it too, is, you got to get those reps somehow. And I think it's just about, trying different things.
That's some good stuff.
I completely agree with that. I love that he's doing that. But I think that's going to be our biggest advice to our speakers, is just do it. And, the more you do it, the better it is, the more natural it'll feel. And I think you playing with it as far as standing up and presenting versus sitting down and seeing what you're really comfortable with. I love that point. That's great.
Yes.
One more thing I want to ask you that I thought was fascinating when I was watching some of your videos is about the snackable components that you talk about in your videos. I think that's really interesting. So would you just spend a second and kind of explain for people who don't understand what that is and why it's important?
So yeah, so I think it really depends. If you think about it from this virtual audience, and I think for us, one of the things that I love to study are documentaries or TV shows or even the news, and figuring out how they're doing different aspects of their presentations, how they're bringing in and changing camera angles, even they could do back-to-back interviews, but maybe one interview is, just the faces next to each other, and one of them is a full body video, right? Just kind of changing up that element. So for me, one of the things that I've been working hard on is figuring out how to kind of bring people on the journey and kind of tell the story, leveraging the things that are in your, virtual space. So, I use a 360 camera for all of my promotional videos. So when someone, they ask me for hey, can you do the, 1 minute video where you're introducing your topic? I have a 360 camera, and it's, just on a tripod. And what's really neat about that is I record the video, but it stands out. It's something a little bit different, but it also kind of segues into, the topics and things that I'm talking about, which I think is, equally important. And, just a little bit of context too, I'm running all of this stuff that I have here, and I can show a little bit on the video screen here first if you want. So here's like an overview of my desk, but, this is here, I'll go a step back here for a second, but so this is the home studio, me standing where I would, naturally present.
Yeah, I like that.
And so this is all from, I'm running this on a MacBook, 2015 MacBook. This isn't run from a giant, enterprise solution. And I'm able to change those camera angles just simply based on the tools that I have set up, right? So I can do different angles where I change, I can use different segues. I can use the angles where we can even, switch back to me here in front of the camera. So part of it is figuring out, that setup, that configuration. And then I will also say, I've done more practice and more rehearsal with virtual than I ever have for all of the stages I've ever been on. I'm not sure if it's a good thing to admit, but I think, with all the things that could go wrong, like knowing where to stand, I usually put sticky notes on the floor so I know, I can feel it on my feet where I should be standing for different camera angles. So, it definitely is, all about repetition.
Well, perfect practice makes
Awesome.
perfect.
Yes.
There's absolutely no doubt about it.
Yes.
And he's, obviously, Brian, what you've done is you've put together this incredible studio. You've taken into account all the great equipment. You're getting yourself focused in the way you need to be based on using your equipment, your talents, and your knowledge and your presentation capability. You're doing all that together. And that's really, truly what you're suggesting for all these individuals out there to do. The other speakers, they need to find their niche and find out how they can work with their equipment.
Exactly.
So, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask Brian today?
I've enjoyed it so much.
Brian, we've loved having you.
Thank you.
It's not very often where I have a conversation where I learn this much, and I certainly did. I wish we had more time.
Well, and I'm sure our audience will learn a lot. And I'm sure they would love to have the list that you put together. So that'd be great.
But thanks again, Brian, and everybody out there, you be outspoken.